Welcome, everybody. It is Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I want to thank our friends over at Deepwater Wind. In the house with me is the money man, Gary Sass. Cha-ching. Welcome back to Business Monday.
Thank you.
So let's see. Many people in the country have taken a battered and bruising over the past few weeks to their 401k and their retirements. I know these economic downturns to stock markets and portfolios don't affect folks like you when you're in that super rich money man mode.
It only affects day traders.
It only affects day traders. Or people who've retired from GE. That stock's hovering right about $7. Let's go around the world. Let's start in Paris. Folks in Paris are not pleased. There's hundreds of thousands of folks, kind of working class, middle class folks, displeased with kind of globalism, transformation of the French economy towards a greener economy. In part, there was a tax on petroleum to try and make the country greener. This is a little bit of like Brexit, a little bit like Trumpism. What's the impact of this across the world?
I think the impact is the elites to stand back and take notice that when they talk about carbon taxes or they talk about raising gasoline taxes, it may not affect them who are in the top 5%, but it does affect working people in France. And these are not necessarily Parisians, but these are people that live outside of Paris.
Right.
They're farmers. They haven't got a
truck
big
drivers.
Truck drivers. So it affects the middle class. It affects people, working people that haven't got a big raise. And so when somebody comes in and says, "Well, it's your obligation to pay an additional gasoline tax," so we discourage the use of fossil fuels without telling me that I can stop using fossil fuels. So I end up paying more tax, and then I look around and say, okay, even if I do my civic duty and I use less fossil fuels, what impact is that going to have on climate change? Because no one wants climate change.
Right.
Everyone wants a clean environment. And they find out it's not very much, but they do find out it's one less pair of shoes for a child. It's eating more macaroni and less chicken. Those are real issues. And we in this world, whether it's Trumpism or whether it's the government in Hungary or whether it's the government in Poland, or whether it's the reaction in France, or whether it was the British vote to get out of Brexit, you're hearing back from working people that, these ideas are great, but somebody has to pay for them, and you ain't paying for them, and we can't afford to pay for them. So let's rethink. Let's think about cost and benefit, and let's get a little more politically real.
Keep going around the world. We're still in a trade war, or a hiatus from the trade war, or the trade war, whatever we're in with China right now from a trade standpoint. The markets don't like it. Stock market has seen a significant retraction. I think we've lost all of the gains of 2018 in these past couple of weeks. Is this a shot across the bow by financial markets saying, let's get this cleaned up and cleaned up pretty quickly?
Yeah, absolutely, because one thing markets don't like is uncertainty. And the way President Trump is conducting the international economic policy of this country as it relates to China specifically is very upsetting, because there's no certainty. There's this process of kind of sophomoric negotiations. And as you look at where to make investments over the long term, you get scared, and it affects the markets. And there are a couple of issues that I think really should be noted. One, a colossal mistake was made by not getting allies together to deal with the Chinese. The Chinese are bad people in terms of trade. They don't live and play by the rules. What they do,
they don't live and play by rules that they've agreed to either.
Right.
So they'll sign a trade agreement and turn around and violate it the next day. And it has had an adverse effect on our economy over the past couple of decades.
but not just
by stealing intellectual thought.
Well, I want to come back to that, because we're in some cases our worst enemy on this intellectual property. But it has had an effect on European countries, has an effect on Germany. It's had an effect on other countries in the Asia Rim. And the way to fight with China is to get allies.
Right.
You know, in a very different way. The analogy I would use is when H.W. Bush.
Right. I knew you were going there.
Well, he should be mentioned. You know, knocked out Saddam Hussein. He did it with a lot of allies.
Right.
There was strength in allies, even though we supplied most of the punch. There was still strength in allies. So to fight China and try to even the playing field on trade, it takes a concerted effort of several countries. Trump has gotten us into a position where we're fighting this, and other people have an interest in fighting it, but who'd want to be on our side? Because
right.
we're so unpredictable. Our leadership is so unpredictable. So that's a problem. The second problem is what is the balance of the cost that we're willing to pay for goods. American companies, this wasn't the government necessarily. It may have done with the government's blessing at some point. American companies sold their soul, and they agreed to various things on intellectual property for the ability to produce cheaper goods.
Yeah.
And now some of those roosters are coming home. So I think we have to look at American corporations and talk about their corporate responsibility, which Trump does, but he does it in a very ham-hock kind of way. We have to look about building alliances, and we have to get some certainty in it. You know, the Trump at the meeting of the G20 basically, said, well, in the next 90 days, we had 90-day cooling off period to negotiate an agreement with China. Somebody ought to tell the Chinese about that.
Yeah,
because,
right.
because
it seemed to be big news to them because they were unaware that that was the cooling off period.
We have a big problem, and these are legitimate issues.
Right.
Trump is not wrong on China. There's a smidgen of truth in everything he talks about.
Yeah.
But the leadership and the predictability and the consistency is very bad for markets. And Trump may brag that, oh, it's great to be unpredictable if you're negotiating a real estate deal on Fifth Avenue in New York City. It ain't so damn great to be unpredictable to people that don't even speak your language, and you're dealing with long-term trade relationships. So but I think China is a fight worth having, but I think we have to organize better. We have to get allies. We have to be more predictable, and we have to be more realistic about what kind of tariffs we can talk about. And American corporations have a responsibility in how they manage intellectual property going forward.
So as we've seen this disruption over the past few weeks, not only taking place in our financial markets and in France, what we haven't seen is either by the existing Republican Congress, Republican Senate, Republican House for another few weeks, or the incoming Democratic House leadership, any real narrative or any strength in conversation. There has not been a strong call to action to make any type of compromise on any of these issues.
Well, it's really up to the executive branch, because you got to be careful. Congress is not responsible for negotiating our foreign policy or our trade policy.
But there is a bully pulpit, right? Congress has
definitely.
a bully pulpit.
But the responsibility for bringing something to Congress is an executive responsibility. I thought it was a very curious person that Trump designated as the negotiator of the Chinese, with the Chinese on trade. But I think you'll begin to see some of that come out. You've been seeing more Republicans lately having the intestinal fortitude to start questioning Trump as more information comes out from Mueller's probe, or from the Southern District in New York. The Democrats really have to not just focus on the negative, that they're going to, now it's our turn to have all these hearings, which are basically kindergarten show and tell, and start focusing on substance. And American people are looking for that, because the Democrat plan that they came out 6 months ago really hasn't caught people's attention. What they call better? What they call? Do you recall what they called it?
No,
they had some kind of name that somebody
right.
One of the
catchphrase.
Gave them, and it talks about the same things, but they have to talk about real things on infrastructure. They have to talk real things about education and improving schools. They have to have better oversight over what's happening in our trade deals. Hopefully, when the Congress comes in and begins to do serious work, that may happen. But don't bet on it, because there's going to be a lot of political gridlock with a Senate being controlled by the Republicans, and a lot of people in the House either looking, in case rightfully at finding out what's happening with the Trump administration.
There are going to be more investigations out of the House than we can than there are House members.
And you have the perfect storm. So you
Right.
you have investigations and then this pent up desire to investigate and to get at the truth. And then you have the party going very far to the left.
Right.
And so if you have a party that's going very far to the left and you're dealing in international issues, and a part of the party that really wants to say, we got to get to the bottom of what are very sticky situations, it's very hard to come back to the middle and be a problem solver.
And a presidential election coming around the corner.
They could have 30 candidates. So I have to speak positively about problem solving. I'm associated with this group. No
I
Labels.
do. We've written about it.
And you know what No Labels was able to pull off?
No.
No Labels went to the Speaker, and these were the Democrats in No Labels. There were 9 Democrats, and there were also 9 Republicans in this Problem Solvers Caucus on the rules. And they told the Speaker that they would not vote for a Speaker. They would vote for Nancy Pelosi, but they would not vote for a Speaker until there was movement on reforming the rules. And they got about 50% of what they asked for because those 9 votes were needed. So I think the moral of the story is it shows that there is a possibility, if you're strategic and tactical and tough, to move things to the center. We're going to have a conference at Bryan on the 19th with No Labels on bipartisanship. I know No Labels is organizing what they call a unity conference up in Manchester, in the spring. So I'm hopeful. I'm not Pollyannaish, but there may be a few things that we can start working on and drawing both Democrats and Republicans together. But it's going to require moderation. And the people that fight what I've just described are both the extreme right and the extreme
absolutely.
left.
Well, because that's their oxygen.
Yeah.
Well, let's take this. Mike Riley, GOP candidate for general treasurer, and has been an outspoken person on a lot of issues, but is pounding away on social media on the fact that the last 30 days hit to retirement funds in Rhode Island is going to be unso kind, and that there isn't been a lot of conversation about it. Is that a fair critique? Are we going to see some horrific numbers coming out of the November and December performance of the retirement funds of both Providence and the state's retirement system? And what's the implication of those things for, especially in the case of Providence, a wildly underfunded retirement system already?
Well, the Providence system is a basket case, and so
is that the technical term that you finance guys use?
Yeah,
basket
I like
case?
it. I could think of another one, but I don't think you'd want me to say it on this show. But it's all screwed up. I'll leave it like that. And it's sick. So certainly, and any time the economy sneezes, the Providence pension system gets not just a cold, gets pneumonia.
Right.
The state, I have to stand back a little bit, I want to say, because I haven't been following what the experience has been. I've heard talk that the current treasurer, the return on investment, is pretty mediocre. And so if you go into a recession with rising interest rates with mediocre returns, then it can hurt. What it means is that the taxpayer has to belly up more in order to meet the actuarial requirements of not increasing the unfunded liability.
Or do you have to have pension reform 2.0?
Well, that's the sequel is never as good as the movie, and based on
Godfather 2.
Well, it's an interesting thing you say. You've raised a bigger issue about the sequel. Who would lead pension reform 2.0? We have a governor right now who hasn't spoken up about failing schools. I saw in GoLocal that an economist at URI says October was a bad month.
Terrible month.
You're talking about doing something on pension reform 2.0. We know that there'll be a lot of pressure on the administration and the legislature to put together a budget and I think they're very modest, but put together a budget with relatively modest, deficits. So you have all these issues. So I'm not sure where the leadership comes from. I think there are advantages and disadvantages of having a lame duck administration.
Well, I think we have a double lame duck, and I'll give you a anecdotal example of that potentially Governor Raimondo may have checked out or checked into her new role as head of the Democratic Governors Association with far more vigor than her focus on leading Rhode Island over the next 2 years. On Friday, almost evening, at about 5:15, 5:20 p.m., the governor's office sent out their message remembering Pearl Harbor. Now, it was after the business day.
Was it on the 7th of?
It still fell in the 7th, but it was not exactly the first thing in the morning. I'm sure no news organization published it. No veteran heard it. No veteran's family heard it because it came out almost at 6 o'clock on a Friday night. Usually it's the bad news you dump at the Friday night, not the acknowledge a critical point in American history. And what it said to everyone here instantaneously was that this is not a attention-oriented administration. This is an administration that is very, very intrigued at what's going on down in Washington. And there's lots of rumors of her interest in running for being a candidate for vice president and being in the mix of these 30 candidates, 20 candidates who are contemplating running for president of the United States, that she might be the counterweight, being a northeastern female governor.
Well, I'll give the benefit of the doubt for this reason, for at least another few weeks or a few months. There was an election. Everybody worked extremely hard day and night on the election.
About a month ago.
Yeah, but
it was only 12 months in a year.
It was about, well, exactly a month ago. And so there's going to be some, downtime between the election and the inauguration. Let's have this conversation on February 15th.
Yeah.
Then you'll have a better feel for what's going on.
Almost was unable to respond to the test scores. I think it's been a series of anecdotal experiences over the past 30 days. And you might give it more credit if it was the first term where they don't know where, the bathrooms are. But this is an experienced team that seems to be maybe not as focused as they need to be for the best interest of Rhode Island. But we'll see.
Well, we'll see. If it was the first term, because I've been through the first terms and second terms, you feel an obligation to say something. Sometimes you say something wrong,
right,
but you really want to show that you're in charge and you've got control of the government. In this case, it may be just the normal downtime. It may not. It may be that they've been there so long and they don't have any answers, or it may be they really just don't care.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll find out over the next few weeks. Some other little chinks and question marks that are starting to emerge. We talked a little bit about some of the rolling deficits that are happening. Sports betting did not get off to as clean a launch, missed most of the gaming season in sports betting, according to experts in Las Vegas. Rhode Island, if Gina Raimondo created some momentum in the economy as she claimed and created some positive movement, isn't it really critical, especially in a time of a little bit of emerging economic uncertainty, that she double down and lead and try and help guide Rhode Island through these questionable periods?
Oh, it's important, yeah, because she has the political capital now to make some structural changes. And so being a lame duck, she is in a position to use that political capital, whether it's fixing schools, whether it's doing things to make the business climate more attractive, whether it's getting rid of people at DCYF and human services that have really screwed up the last couple of years. So there's that opportunity because you don't have to worry about what some constituent groups are thinking. You have to just worry about getting it right, and so that should be a helpful thing to the people, but it takes hard work. It takes interest. I don't know if she's announced yet who's staying in this cabinet and who's moving on. So that needs to happen. I assume that most of the administration will stay in place. If it does, then they should be able to hit the ground running. But you can judge right away by what kind of initiatives and what kind of programs come out. If it's just more of the same, if it's to spend a little more on Commerce Rhode Island, we know what they've done. They've done some things that are helpful. They've done some things that really don't change, not game changes, but they're expensive, structural changes. What we're going to do about schools. The game plan on schools is pretty simple. We could follow what Massachusetts did, and I wrote something on it recently. There were 3 things. I don't know if you want to get into it, but there were 3 things that Massachusetts did that we could do tomorrow and begin to change.
No, absolutely. Well, we talked about some of it last week. I will say this about Commerce. They sponsor a segment on Mondays, and a lot of small businesses come on, emerging businesses, some in tech, some down in the defense industry. And I will say this consistently, and I dig at it every time. They all say how responsive Commerce is. And I would say that is an improvement over previous administrations.
No question.
There's a professionalism there now. Whether you like the hotels and apartment strategy to put laborers and building trades to work, we can discuss that. It's finite. It doesn't create a lot of ongoing jobs. But the one thing that is consistently across it is responsive, connecting people, finding resources as best they can. So, and it's not been, 5 companies. We've probably had 50 on over the past year.
I think there's several things. I think you're absolutely right. I think in terms of the blocking and tackling, much better than it was before. And it's better than it was before for 2 reasons. They have the resources.
Right. That's a big point.
The previous economic development corporations, whatever we called it, was pretty resource starved. They may have wanted to be responsive, but there was no one there to be responsive. There weren't the resources, and they brought in some professional people. Give them credit for that.
Yep.
So that's why they were created. That's why they're there. They have the resources now to do a better job. The second thing that Commerce has to do, which I think they're not doing as well, is how are they helping to be a game changer agency? And there's a certain amount of capital projects that are fine. I don't think anybody would argue, about that. But there's also, structural change and direction that would help Rhode Island not to be the first in and last out as the economic cycle changes. And where the jury is still out, it's not clear that they're really dealing with the substance of making structural changes, so we're not the first in and last out. They're running the agency better. They're being more responsive. They've funded some capital projects. I don't think the right ones in all cases. I think too many, but that's an argument. They've certainly done that. But what they don't appear to have done is connected the dots. There's a lot of programs that you and I can talk about and probably think they have potential. But how do these programs all hang together? How do these programs indicate that in 18 months or whenever we go into a recession that we'll be affected by the recession, but we're going to be a little more recession-proof,
right,
because we were the squirrel during the good times that was saving our nuts.
Right.
And then that's
absolutely.
Where I think the jury is still out, and I think there's some issues there.
Last thing is we have an editorial today, actually first published yesterday, and got a lot of reads and a lot of reaction, which was that, when 195 Commission got created, listen, we spent in federal and state dollars about $1 billion moving the highways and clearing that space of environmental issues, etc. And it's now 8 years ago that the first commission was named by Governor Chafee. He's the first one to name the commission members. Now 8 years later, and the first real substantive private investment comes along 2 years ago in Fane, whether you like the project or not. 2 years later, he's still stuck over in Providence City Hall trying to get a height variance. And did we miss the boat of, if we're going to create this 195, have some rules, take the city's politics out of it, and have one-stop shopping? Do we need one-stop shopping for a project like this?
Well, if I got a second to talk about the history, I think we've created a monster that's not a helpful thing. For years, various governors, I can remember working with Governor Kacheri, wanted to do something. We wanted to involve Brown, we wanted to involve the hospitals, we wanted to involve the city of Providence and the state. And that was, to use the proverbial herding cats, that was herding cats. We could not get off the dime. The only project, one project got off the dime and it was a disaster. We could put a museum in the old.
Oh, God.
Yeah. But the project that does get off the dime is the joint nursing school.
Yeah, give Governor Lincoln Chafee some credit. Not the prettiest thing, a little bit of sausage making.
And because of there were some other issues but that gets off the dime. Then we create this I-95, and I thought that was an awful mistake because people live in cities, they don't live in development districts, they don't live in special I-95 districts. And so you had no choice politically but to create this unworkable entity that was neither fish nor fowl, and you're paying the price. I would have much rather have seen the state and the city knock heads.
Yeah.
But to come into a city, the middle of a city, and say, okay, city, you are no longer sovereign in your own city, it creates a government cafoople.
But in some cities, they've had the success of creating those zones and saying, hey, listen, we're going to acquiesce our sovereign right because we think it's in the best interest of creating some economic movement. We've just gone through a period of, whatever you want to say, 4 or 5 years of significant economic growth and a lot of private investment in real estate in New England. And we're now coming out of that period of growth, and we've got 3 projects in the ground, all wildly subsidized. I mean, nursing school's a state project with a private participant. Wexford, massive state investment.
It's not your grandfather's Wexford. It's a very different Wexford.
No, it is. It is a grandfather's Wexford. It is not the innovation hub.
No, Wexford used to be innovation because I remember the work they did in Carolina and Maryland, and that was really good, innovative stuff with medical schools. This is not the same thing.
This is not the same thing. This is a building. They're going to put CIC in there. They're moving some Brown jobs over there, and they're moving the Johnson & Johnson jobs over from Ship Street that they already paid $1 million for the space over there to be redone, over to put subsidized Johnson & Johnson moving into this space. So not a lot. Oh, and an apartment complex up in the Jewelry District.
In 8 years?
In 8 years.
Okay.
Is it a redo time? Is it time to...
Well, I think it's time to look at it because you have to ask a couple of questions. If you're going to create a special purpose district, what identifies the district? These are city blocks,
right?
And they were opened up because we made some infrastructure improvements. But what is it?
Right.
What is it? Is 5 more blocks of downtown Providence, or is it something else? We've never clearly defined that.
There's a mission statement. If you can tell me what it means, I'm all for
well,
it.
They got this cockamamie idea that it's the innovation district, so the innovation capital of the world. I'm not quite sure what that means. I get suspicious of people that use the buzzword of the day to describe a project.
I will tell you this. In the spring, into the early summer, the sunflowers over on that one parcel are as pretty as anything in Rhode Island.
Well, let me give you an example. I knew what the Jewelry District was.
Yeah.
Because they had plants that were making jewelry. Right. So yep. I knew what that did. I am not sure what this does. Is it just a renewal district to build facilities that we otherwise would not have built? So you really have a problem of defining what you're doing. And so I would agree with you that we need to go back in and ask the questions about, what is the I-95 district? Is it the appropriate geography? What is the mission and the goal? What are we trying to redevelop? And then the other issue, which I get very concerned about, is when the politics of the state and the politics of when people in the state legislature are trying to cram something down the throat of local people. Now, local people don't always make good decisions. The way the city of Providence handle the zoning and the permitting, for Fane, there's a lot of room for criticism.
Yeah.
The way the councils acted, the way the mayors acted, don't really increase your confidence.
But you know what? I'll say this. If they could have made a decision within 6 months, one way or the other, thumbs up or thumbs down, I think everybody would feel better about it. If the city council said, we don't want this, here's our process, doesn't meet these goals, 6 months, you're out of here. I think Jason Fane would be happier than spending $1 million having to keep going back and forth.
So this is the question. Yeah. So this is the question you come up with. You have a city that was inept in handling the problem,
right? And
then you've got an I-95 district that really has certain questions of what its mission and function is. So you got the worst of both possible worlds. You got a city that doesn't feel it's sovereign and controls its own destiny and lollygags its way to this point, and you've got a development district that none of us can define.
Right.
That's not a good way to develop a community.
Gary Sass, the money man, knows it all, can tell you the exchange rate in any part of the world at any time. He's like a Rain Man on these things, knows what's going on. Thank you as always. We're going to be right back in about 30 seconds with Saul Kaplan. He's going to tell us when the Uber IPO is. He's going to tell us if Uber's going to buy Bird Scooter. He's going to tell us if Elon Musk's interview last night on 60 Minutes was good or bad for Tesla. He knows it all. We'll be right back in about 30 seconds here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Welcome back, everybody, to Business Monday. I'm Josh Fenton. He is the guy who innovates just about everything. Saul Kaplan from Biff. Lots of stuff going on. This murky stock market has sparked all these unprofitable innovators, Lyft and Uber, to hit the gas hard and try and get in while the going's good. Lyft and Uber have both filed some documents with the SEC looking that they are racing to hit a first quarter IPO. What's your thoughts on these capitalists?
That's a nice broad question to kick us off.
Yeah, well,
first of all, they must be scared that the door in the window is closing.
Oh, yeah.
The IPO window is closing with the stock market taking some hits here. Boy, it's been a roller coaster. Lyft has been posturing. They want to go first, before Uber sucks all the oxygen out of the room.
Totally.
Or capital, or whatever we're talking about here.
Enthusiasm.
And so I don't blame them. It's a timing game. It's always about where the market is and what they can come to the market with, what the market will absorb. And of course, they want to get the highest price they can and the best market that they can. So they're always going to time that to their best interest. But in the long run, it doesn't matter that much, because in the long run it'll all even out, and it'll be worth what the value of the company is. But they'll try to take some chips off the table, whether it's the initial investors that are trying to get paid off, or whether they're trying to raise additional capital. I suspect, that they have plenty of working capital to fuel their growth. And they probably want to pay off some of the early investors, including some of the senior management team as well.
It also came out last week or the week before that Uber specifically was looking to purchase either Bird scooters, which got
Sure.
a $2 billion valuation earlier in the summer,
Imagine that.
or Lime,
Yeah.
which are the little green ones that nearly run you over here in Providence.
Yeah.
And they want to really be the transportation solution company to the next iteration of how people are going to move.
They're going to play in every aspect of the transportation ecosystem, and they're going to make some smallish bets, just to hedge,
just 2-3
which is a
billion
rounding
here.
error when
Right.
you have the kind of market cap that Uber has, which is kind of scary to say. But they're not going to leave themselves vulnerable to any transportation option and try to help people move seamlessly across those platforms. And mostly it's a competitive play to keep somebody from coming in and starting to take share out of the marketplace. We'll see. In the end, I think the biggest plays are we're gonna have to see which of these ride-sharing companies make the transition into the autonomous vehicle, the driverless car market. That's the real big play here, and you've seen some movement in that regard here over the last few weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the interview with Elon Musk on 60 Minutes last night.
I saw part of it. He's an interesting character.
He was beyond interesting. I'm not sure if likable is another term to be used, but he was certainly interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things he threw out as a little bit of a footnote was that he thinks he stabilized Tesla, and they're now in a production structure that is meeting some of the promises that were made.
Yeah.
But he uttered that at one point they were losing $100 million a week, and that they would burn through all their cash, and that they were weeks away from complete, utter failure.
Imagine that.
You've lost some money in your day, right?
No, never.
Have you ever eclipsed, let's just go with $50 million. Have you ever lost $50 million a week consistently?
The scale that we talk about here, when you talk about Elon Musk and the amount of bravado this guy has, right. Whether it's SpaceX,
right.
Where he's going to go off to Mars, and that's where he's going to retire.
What was
potentially
he's
die,
launched 6,000 satellites? He's been the biggest delivery system of satellites.
No, he thinks big. You have to give him that. He did come very, very close because the drain on cash, and they couldn't go back to the market until they proved whether they could or couldn't deliver, on their Model 3 production schedule.
Right.
And hats off. You got to give the guy some credit. I mean, they jumped through a lot of hoops to get the production, to ramp up production, and the production's been pretty solid. They're fulfilling demand in the market, not without pain in the organization, because we've seen some people.
The one other thing that came out that was, I thought, the aha moment was that the car's not coming in at the $35,000 price tag that was promised, that created the demand and all the pre-orders, but it's coming in more like $55,000 or $60,000.
When you add the options that are not so much options.
Yeah, like a steering wheel and tires.
No, it's not that bad. No, I heard his answer to that on 60 Minutes, and I thought he handled that right. He's like, look, I'm not good at predicting the timing of these things, but directionally, we're headed there. We're headed towards an affordable, all-electric vehicle, and I believe that he will absolutely get there. I think he's out to be the Henry Ford of his era, and I don't think he's going to settle for just skimming off the top of the marketplace. He wants to move. Did you hear his answer when he talked about the fact that he's open sourced his library of patents?
That was right where I was going to go next. That was the third aha moment, which is that all the IP on the Tesla is open source and can be accessed by any other developer, programmer, innovator, etc. The absolute catastrophic difference than usually how IP is treated, which is I hoard it, I protect it, and it gives me the value to my company.
Well, that's what the industrial era was about, right? It was about you scale, you protect your IP, you build regulations, you hire lawyers to keep other people and protect your patents, right? And here comes this guy, Elon Musk, who says, no, I have a different way to do this, right? We're going to move the whole world to electric vehicles. We're going to lead the way, and we're going to open source all the know-how and encourage lots of competition to come in, leverage our know-how, and you know what? He's challenging the market. Do it better than we do it. We'll learn from you. We'll continue to get better. You'll keep pressure on us. This is what innovation is really about. It's not about a patent and you protect it,
right,
and then you rest off your laurels, for the life of the patent, and then you fight to keep others from the marketplace. We sell this in the pharmaceutical industry, right?
Right.
In this industry, he's saying, look, we're going to be a market maker, right? We're going to create the market. We're going to have the best technology in the marketplace, and we're so convinced of that we're going to put our patents and all of our know-how out there and open source all of that software, right? When we start to...
So that but isn't there a little method to the madness that if others start to enhance it, we can acquire them, we can absorb them.
We can compete.
By the way, they'll be working off our IP. They're not working on someone else's IP or creating new IP.
Well, it'll be not just for the IP, but let's talk about the software when we go to driverless cars, right? And when it's autonomous, right? The last thing we want as a society is proprietary software, right, where Tesla has its software and it keeps getting smarter and smarter, to avoid accidents or know how the software moves the car in the right position, right? What you want is open source software where everything we learn, every accident, enhances all.
By the way, how easy is it going to be to protect the software of driverless cars after the first accident? I mean, the first motion filed in that lawsuit will be, let's take a look at what the capacity is of that software.
Well, it'll be easier to protect if it's open source.
That's right.
And everybody learns together.
Right.
And so when we learn and that gets incorporated into the software, everybody's software gets updated. This is what we should be making sure the regulations force, right? So that no one company owns the proprietary software. And so I only am safe, if I buy this car, but if I buy this one, the software is not as good. No, we want open source software. So this is the brilliance behind what Elon was sharing with us, about open source software. And guess what? He's in the leadership position. If you're a market maker, and you're worried less about share and more about making the market, you want other people to come in, and you want to use that with a sense of urgency to keep getting better faster, keep improving your product, keep improving customer service, right? And you see this a little bit. We talked about Amazon a lot, right?
We're going to go to Amazon one second. I don't know if you saw the...
All right, you're in charge. It's your
If you saw the press report today that Amazon has announced that they're going to make a major toy initiative on their stores with their own product, and that sent earlier, it bounced back, but it sent Hasbro stock reeling earlier in the day in trading, bounced back to being flat. Is there any company in the world that can just ruin a CEO's day more than Amazon? All Jeff Bezos has to say is, I'm thinking about going into the nonprofit Innovation Summit meeting world.
Great.
And you're like, oh, God, I just got ranked #2 in the country by Inc. magazine, and now this guy's coming over.
Yeah, well, I just follow on to the Elon Musk conversation here, right? If you think that this is a share game, this is not. This is an entire new way that commerce works, and he is setting the bar. And everybody needs to play. The technologies that they use are not proprietary to Amazon.
Well, listen, is there any technology that you can really defend? I mean, the iPhone came out in July, end of June, early July of 2007, right? They'd taken years to develop. It was just a few months later. I know they had to pay off some dollars. But there was a phone almost identical by a competitor within 6 months, right?
They were never the first with anything, going way before the iPhone. When they were competing with Sony, who had the Walkman, right? Everything they came out with, it was less about the product and the technology, although a lot of people think it is just the product and the technology, and more about the ecosystem that they set up, right? The way we got at the apps, the way they encouraged developers to build apps, right? They created this ecosystem where you could come out
crappiest battery in the world so they could sell you so many accessories that it would choke a horse.
Well, my favorite story there is Nokia, right? Who had the most incredible technology. The phones were unbelievable.
They were great
The
phones.
best camera of any phone. Like, they just had so many superlatives from a technology standpoint, and they got their you-know-what kicked by Apple because they had people locked into this system, right? And you were not going to give up your technology to get a slightly better or even a much better phone from Nokia, and now it doesn't exist, right? And so that's because we grew up thinking it was about IP, it was about product, it was just about the technology. Those things are important, but that's not the whole game. And if you're playing a product game in a game where customer experience and service and you're continuing to build a long-term relationship and an ecosystem around that relationship, you're going to beat out the best product all the time, right? All the time, or at least give you the chance to catch up to put a better product. So we got to go from product to customer experience, and then use product and technology to drive customer experience. That's what the lesson that we learn, from Jeff Bezos and Amazon.
You see this all the time. You think about all this time. This transformation, but now the transformation is happening in a lot of spaces with the 800-pound gorilla, right? Uber's an 800-pound gorilla.
Right.
Amazon's an 800-pound. Tesla's an 800-pound gorilla. Where's the disruption to them? Why isn't the playing field flatter? Why aren't we, when we talk about Uber, we talk about Lyft. Why aren't we running off 7 different companies? In the early auto development in the United States, there were 20 different companies that were all competing, or why aren't we seeing the innovation at that level?
Number one, the markets have been too slow to move, right? So they got a huge head start, and they just keep building on it and building on it. Number two, we're kind of sitting back and watching these huge platforms, and I think you're starting to see the backlash, right? Are they too big? Do they command too much control and influence in the marketplace? You're going to start to see whether it's organically at the local level, regulations that start to deal with the impact at the community level, all the way up to the federal government, where I really do believe you're going to start to see more posturing around potential antitrust. Maybe we got to think about, like the Bell Lab, we got to split this thing up. And so I think you're going to see some healthy pushback on, do we really want one platform to control and influence the entire marketplace? These companies have waited too long to build relationships at local, municipal levels and up at the federal level in terms of relationships, and really having a good conversation about what do we want in society from these technologies? How do we make sure that they're being used for our purposes, for the purpose of individuals, citizens, students, patients, consumers? And I think you're going to start to see some backlash to that. Having said that, they rush like crazy to be the large behemoth, the elephant in the room, right? And so that it makes it very hard for folks to compete with that, and we're seeing that now.
CVS, you have to give credit for their Aetna acquisition. It was a bold attempt to compete with some of these innovators, and in the case of Amazon being one of them. Why aren't you seeing it with the automakers? Why aren't automakers saying, listen, we know how to make cars better than Elon Musk. Why don't we own the driverless cars? And why aren't we building driverless fleets instantaneously?
Well, the auto industry has been very slow, and has historically been slow. First it was to react to vehicles being made overseas, and now they were too slow.
But how many times do you have to get hit in the head to realize, hey, I better?
You would think.
I got to change my behavior.
You would think. However, they're not ceding the space. They're going to come after it. You saw some dramatic moves from GM, although I saw today, that as part of that downsizing, right, one of the things that got killed was the Volt, which was the first kind of got people used to electronic cars, and it made it easy for them because it was hybrid, and they could play it. Today they they said
We're done.
We're done with the Volt. But they ironically argued that that's to help them move to electric vehicles faster, which I'm not sure that
The Volt at least was a cool-looking little car.
Yep.
Well, how does the Prius continue to live?
Yep.
I don't understand that.
They also have a more difficult time. It is much easier to transform services.
Yeah.
So if you're Amazon, to experiment with new services and to test on a small scale, if you're in the automobile manufacturing business with huge capital outlays, right? It's not so easy to take a plant, that makes one thing, and turn it over to make another thing.
Well, it's funny you talk about that. I was having breakfast with Bob Whitcomb, our columnist on Sundays, yesterday morning, and he was talking about, I can't remember, it was a relative of his that was involved with how fast during World War II, by December 7th, President Roosevelt, declared war. By May, they were building tanks. They weren't building cars. They reinvented everything in 6 months.
Yeah.
Why can't GM, if they could figure out how to make a tank in 6 months?
Yeah, that's a great. That's a really great point. When the burning platform is there, when it's the government and the president of the United States, you will support this war effort.
That's right.
You will repurpose these plants, or we're going to put you out of business.
And we're going to let you make. And we're going to let you make money.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's right.
They made
They
money.
made sure that they stayed
Absolutely.
viable through that. Everything was aligned for them to do it. I think that's a great. I like that, because it shows that even for big capital-intensive manufacturing plant,
Absolutely.
Even there, you can make shifts. You just have to have the willpower to do it.
Right. Isn't that ultimately that the corporations? It's the culture of the corporations that there's no incentive to be the daring man on the trapeze. Or daring woman on the trapeze to try and transform that entity, and if you misstep, you're out.
And I'm sure part of the problem was you need the ability, to tell the story to Wall Street, right? And I'm sure they had a pretty compelling story with a world war and protecting American soldiers and make sure that they had the equipment. It was a pretty compelling story, including to Wall Street, right during that period, and so that also makes it hard. But none of these things can be excuses because. The most brutal thing to happen is the disruptor, that comes in with an entire new way for the industry to work while you're still pedaling the bicycle of the one you have.
Right.
And we'll see whether, if I had to bet on whether the auto manufacturer will win this or whether the technology companies will win, I think it'll be nuanced and there'll be relationships between the two, but you got to bet on the technology, right? Because these guys have been awful slow to change their business model, and they sure don't do experimentation of new business models, right? Well, they're still driving, excuse the pun, the one that they're in today.
Yeah, absolutely. As we see this, we're talked a little bit about Gary about this. You and I have talked about this. Rhode Island spent about $1 billion. Rhode Island, the federal government, 80-20, I think. I don't know if it was 90-10. Spent about $1 billion moving the highways, and part of it was safety, and part of it was to reclaim massive amounts of valuable property for the repurposing of creating a new economic engine, like other cities had done, Boston, etc. And it was about 8 years ago that Governor Chafee named the first members of the commission, and the track record's, I'll put it, spotty at best. We have a nursing school, publicly subsidized, Wexford, publicly subsidized, an apartment complex up in the Jewelry District now being built, and that's about it. And this, whether you like the Fane Tower or don't like it, it's 2 years in and we're still fighting about the height variance up at Providence City Hall. Is it time to restart that model as well? We don't seem to have it right. It doesn't function in really how developers want to be able to go into a city. I can go into city X and go through permitting in 6 months to 12 months. And in Providence, nobody's even seen a final design or a budget yet, and I'm 2 years in and I can't even find out if I can build the building at a height that's economically viable.
This is crunch time, right? The construct that came now, this is personal for me. It goes back to when I was in economic development, and we had worked on the MOU to try to create the right relationship between the city, and the state and economic development. And
who was your counterpart? Was it Cicilline administration then?
He was, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So it's kind of Tom Deller world.
And we
back then.
literally, and I would remember I standing at the Silly press conference, where we all stood there, arm in arm,
Yes.
saying that, look, everyone's interest was going to be at the table, and we were going to work relentlessly, to reposition that land to be an economic driver for the state. Now, it wasn't too long after I left, that the General Assembly took it on themselves and created the commission.
Right.
So okay,
Which sounds right? Like it's official, and the state's got it, and it's got appointees
Right.
from both, and it's going
Right.
to be streamlined, and then
Right.
there's going to be the known.
But you can't.
But in
you
fact,
can't judge
it's
it.
none of those things.
You can't judge it. Now is crunch time, right? Because here's what happens. Right? Of course, you're going to use incentives, right, to catalyze the early development, but
Sure.
you can't sustain those incentives forever. You have to make sure you're smart about where those early plays go. The initial demand. Right, they were working on the supply, getting the parcels right, getting the infrastructure right. The initial demand, of course, was going to come from in-state players, right? Brown that needed to come off the hill because they're landlocked, right? URI that wanted a presence, here, and any developer was going to go off after the institutions that are here,
Right.
That have capital or access to some capital to do development, and so that's okay. That doesn't bother me. The question is, what happens now, right? What happens that early development is shaped, the supply is right, the parcels are good, right? And what happens now when we're trying to bring outside capital in, right, to build on top of what the in-state players did? And so this is really the important time. That's why the Fane Tower is so important, right? When somebody comes in with $300+ million of capital from the outside, right? How do we make sure that we attract it, that we make it easy for them to work through the process? But I'll always put the but on the end. It doesn't mean we have to cede all control
That's right.
for the right growth for us. So
But wouldn't it be better, though, for Jason Fane to know no in 6 months than
Of
get
course.
dragged on for 2.5
but
years?
it never works that way, right?
No, it actually does in
but-
many cities,
Nah,
just not around here.
I think what happens now really matters. Without whining about what happened that got us here, how do we handle the first really large outside investor? Because I'm not sure Wexford, qualifies for
No.
that, right? Because of how heavily subsidized that is, and I'm not sure where the demand comes, to fill the space that
No,
they have,
we're moving
right?
people
'Cause
from one.
After, of course, all the local players, want to influence the way that gets deployed and or fulfilled. But in the end, we can't just have the local players moving and absorbing all that space. We need outside capital, outside players, new jobs catalyzed from that. So let's see how that decision making happens now. I'd be very curious to see what the city does, in terms of vetoing of overriding the veto, or if they don't, does the state come back in and restructure, the way that happens to take tighter control over that? I hope it doesn't come to that, because you want a partnership between the city and the state. You don't want one just jamming through
Right.
what's in the state's best interest here in the city, but you also don't want the city to hold development hostage. So I think this next period of time
It's
is
tomorrow.
really important. Well, we'll know tomorrow.
Yeah,
whether-
we'll know
whether
tomorrow
they-
one way or the
yeah,
other.
No, that's right.
Listen, thank you as always.
pleasure.
What's new at Biff?
What? Everyone's busy. We're on the road now, like kind of the lead up right before the end of the year. I'm leaving this week to a healthcare convening where I'm going to speak to a group of 12 chief innovation officers for hospital systems around the country. And surprise, surprise, we're going to talk about what's the difference between tweaks and transformation, and what do we need to do to mobilize that. So I'm excited about that. But others at BIF are also on the road, and a lot of really good meetings, talking about innovation and government innovation, in education. It's a really good time. Everybody wants to have the innovation conversation. The challenge is to get below the buzzwords, because
Yeah,
everyone
right.
throws the word around. So it's a good time heading into the holidays.
That's great. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. A great hour with Saul and with Gary Sass. Always one of my favorite times of the week. I get way smart real quick. Thanks for tuning in to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Thanks our friends at Deepwater Wind and Commerce RI. We'll be back tomorrow with Kate Nagel, and she's going to bang up our. She was up at the State House on the appointment of some new judges. That story is up live. Take a look, and lots more coming on Fane Tower this week as the rubber hits the proverbial road on whether or not the council overrides the mayor's veto. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great night.